Folks, it's my coach used to say it's go-to time. It's go time now.
Hello and welcome to the Kyle Olson Show. That new intro is from earlier this week, and I heard it and I thought, that is just so great, so inspirational. I played hockey growing up, and I can't count up all the times my coach said, "Now get out there, it's go-to time." So many. Actually, none. They never said that because it's not an expression. Joe Biden is just revealing again he's got problems. So that was Monday. Joe Biden told us it's go-to time. Fast forward 2 days, 2 whole days. And here's Joe Biden speaking to the National Association of Black Journalists.
Have you taken a cognitive test?
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not, what do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
What do you say to President Trump, who brags about his tests and makes your mental state an issue for voters?
Well, if he can't figure out the difference between an elephant and a lion, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Did you watch that? Look, come on, man. I know you're trying to goad me, but, I'm so forward-looking to have an opportunity to sit with the president or stand with the president in debates. There's going to be plenty of time. And by the way, as I joke with him, I shouldn't say it. I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't say. Anyway, I am very willing to let the American public judge my physical and mental my physical as well as my mental fitness.
Now, there's so much to analyze here. First, he asked a black reporter if he was tested for cocaine before he got his job and asked if he was a junkie. Who does that? I mean, really, who does that? Can you imagine if Donald Trump did that? And why is he so defensive and offended when somebody asks if he's taken a cognitive test? Don't you think any rational person would say, "No, I haven't done that"? And if it's no big deal, why not just do it, release it, and move on? Somebody, help me out. What am I missing? I mean, really, seriously, why not just do that and move on? Maybe there's a reason. Then he invited we, the American people, to judge his mental health for ourselves. If only he could say mental fitness. I mean, good Lord. Trump campaign, take that 15 seconds of video and put every fricking dime you have on it and get that on TV. Let voters see for themselves. He tries to say, judge my mental fitness, but he can't even spit the words out. It's Joe Biden, in his own words, or lack thereof. Why should Joe Biden be forced to take a cognitive assessment? Listen to this mashup America Rising put together.
Have you taken a cognitive test?
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? The rapidly rising I don't know. Why the hell would I take a test?
Battery about the size of this, the top of this, whatever the hell it is, podium.
All men and women created by you know the thing. Why the hell would I take a test?
Should we see in Donald Trump? We choose truth over facts.
To listen to this argument.
What's not to like about Vermont in terms of the beauty of it? And what a neat town. This is sort of a scenic, beautiful town. I am very willing to let the American public judge my physical and mental my physical as well as my mental fitness.
In a bit, I'm going to talk to Rebecca Mansour, my colleague at Breitbart News, who dug into the background of Biden vice presidential prospect Karen Bass. Remember in 2016 and after, Hillary Clinton, John Brennan, and all the others pushing the Russia hoax were trying to claim Donald Trump was a Russian asset? Of course you remember that. That's an interesting door to open, because if there was ever a Cuban asset in the United States government, it's Karen Bass. She's a congresswoman from Los Angeles. Prior to her life in politics, she was a member of the Venceramos Brigade. What's that, you might ask? Students for a Democratic Society, you remember, Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn, the other domestic terrorists who were bombing government buildings and killing their own activists in the process. Well, they started annual 6-week trips to Cuba in 1969, called them the Venceramos Brigades. They did it under the guise of building housing, cutting sugarcane to help the oppressed Cuban economy, which of course was America's fault, and improving relations with the Cuban people. Well, according to a Cuban intelligence defector in 1983, the Venceramos Brigade was a front for Cuban intel to worm its way into the United States. You know who went on one of those trips in 1973 and took a total of 8 long trips to Cuba? Karen Bass, the potential next vice president of the United States. After Breitbart and Tablet magazine brought attention to this, Bass was asked about her affection for Fidel Castro last weekend on Meet the Press. But before we play that clip, let that sink in. A potential vice president is asked about her affection for Fidel Castro.
And then you said something that I found interesting. You said you didn't quite realize how sensitive folks were in South Florida about this still.
No.
And,
go ahead.
And so I'm just curious, sort of, that you thought, well, Californians wouldn't mind that description, but it might offend Floridians. Forget that a minute.
Yeah.
It still seemed as if you had a soft view of Castro, if you will.
Yeah. And let me explain, too, because I think the use of the term comandante en jefe, what I meant by that is that clearly in Florida, that is a term that is endearing to him. I didn't see it that way. I was expressing condolences to the Cuban people, to the people in Cuba, not Cubans around the world. I don't think that is a toxic expression in California, but let me just say, Chuck, lesson learned. Wouldn't do that again. Talked immediately to my colleagues from Florida and realized that that was something that just shouldn't have been said.
So what she's referring to there is Cubans in Florida hate Fidel Castro. They're in Florida and not Cuba for a reason. They wanted freedom, and regardless of what Castro's revolution was supposedly about, it was about communism, control, oppression. According to the Venceramos principles, they believe in democratic centralism. Communism. That's what that means. And that is why Karen Bass went there 8 times in the 1970s. Incidentally, during the Cold War. And she realizes now, if she's Joe Biden's running mate, her history is a major liability to trying to win the all-important state of Florida. Here's more.
When you said you were expressing condolences to the Cuban people, there's many people who believe that the Castro regime in general was keeping them confined, was stifling their freedom, that it actually, getting rid of Castro might have been a celebration to some.
Yeah, maybe. And in the island, I think it's slightly different because, you know, they certainly didn't have the freedom and wouldn't have the freedom to celebrate that. So I think that it is just very important the way the Obama administration had opened up relations with Cuba. I think the best way to bring about change on the island is for us to have closer relations with the country that is 90 miles away.
She had closer relations with Castro in the 70s, as did other numerous American leftists. Did that get us anywhere?
Just very quickly, I'm curious of your reaction. You were called Communist Karen yesterday by the Trump campaign, and Senator Marco Rubio said you would be the most, essentially imply that there was nobody who was ever been considered for the vice presidency that was seen as so much of a Castro sympathizer. How do you react?
Well, one, don't consider myself a Castro sympathizer. Number two, my position on Cuba is really no different than the position of the Obama administration. As a matter of fact, I was honored to go to Cuba with President Obama. I went to Cuba with Secretary Kerry when we raised the flag. So there really isn't anything different. And then, frankly, I believe the Republicans have decided to brand the entire Democratic Party as socialists and communists. So I'm not surprised by Rubio's characterization of me or of a role I would play if I were on the ticket.
Here's Karen Bass the very same day on Fox News Sunday.
Just very quickly, I'm curious of your reaction. You were called Communist Karen yesterday by the Trump campaign, and Senator Marco Rubio said you would be the most, essentially imply that there was nobody who was ever been considered for the vice presidency that was seen as so much of a Castro sympathizer. How do you react?
Well, one, don't consider myself a Castro sympathizer. Number two, my position on Cuba is really no different than the position of the Obama administration. As a matter of fact, I was honored to go to Cuba with President Obama. I went to Cuba with Secretary Kerry when we raised the flag. So there really isn't anything different. And then, frankly, I believe the Republicans have decided to brand the entire Democratic Party as socialists and communists. So I'm not surprised by Rubio's characterization of me or of a role I would play if I were on the ticket.
Yes, that's the same canned answer she gave on Meet the Press. That's called damage control. And I can guarantee you, if Joe Biden picks Karen Bass to be his running mate, the future of America will have never been in more peril, because a Cuban asset will be one heartbeat away from the presidency. And let's be real. If Joe Biden somehow gets elected, Karen Bass would be the president. In America, it wouldn't end well. After all, as the Vince Ramos platform says, quote, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Coming up next, my colleague Rebecca Mansour gives me more details about Karen Bass. This is the Kyle Olson Show. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Last week, Rebecca Mansour wrote a fantastic piece titled Karen Bass's Long March from Communist Fringe to Biden's VP Shortlist at Breitbart News. I invite you to go to Breitbart.com and check it out. It was the headline on the site, got a ton of attention. So, Rebecca, what was the big takeaway from your investigation into Karen Bass?
Well, I think that, to me, it's that she's a dedicated Marxist-Leninist. At least she was at one time. And she hasn't really disavowed that until now that she's under intense scrutiny because of the vice presidential vetting process. I mean, she's finally come out and said, flat out in an interview with NBC News earlier this week, she said, and I quote, "I am not a socialist. I'm not a communist. I belong to one party my entire life, and that's the Democratic Party." Okay, now that's probably true in the sense that I don't believe she's been a member of any other political party. But that is not the full picture when you consider her decades-long association with communists, her membership in a communist front group controlled by Fidel Castro's communist regime, and her public praise of her communist mentor and her communist influencers as she was growing up. This all paints a much more complicated picture. And, this week I did a listicle at Breitbart.com listing these facts. I mean, just taking it one by one here, Kyle, the early communist influences. In an interview just in 2008, she spoke about how communists played, and I quote, a huge role in shaping her when she was a student at Hamilton High School on the west side of Los Angeles. She said that a lot of the parents at the school were Communist Party members. She said, and I quote, "I grew up with a lot of red diaper babies." That's a slang term for children of Communist Party USA members during the Cold War. And she says that, and she mentions that many of her teachers were communists, and so they played a very influential role in her growing up. And then in 2017, she took to the floor of the U.S. House to eulogize her, quote, friend and mentor, O'Neill Cannon, who is a leading member of the Communist Party USA. In fact, in the obituary for Cannon, the communist website People's World cited his work as the Communist Party USA's education director in Southern California and as a member of the party's Southern California and National Central Committees. So there's that. And then there's also, I believe that you mentioned earlier in your show, Kyle, her membership, in fact, her leadership of a communist front group that was founded in 1969 by Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. And it was run by the Cuban intelligence service. And we know a lot about this. This is the Venceremos Brigade. Karen Bass was at the time listed as a leader of the Venceremos Brigade in Los Angeles. And in 1973, she made her first trip to Cuba when she was 19. And throughout the 1970s, she would make 8 trips to Cuba. Think about that. This was Cuba when it was, Americans were not allowed to go to Cuba at that time. This was during the height of the Vietnam War, when Cuba was hosting Viet Cong combatants who were sending Americans home in body bags from Vietnam. This was a communist regime, and we know, like, as I said, that the Cuban intelligence service was running the Venceremos Brigade. We have testimony from former Cuban intelligence officials who defected to the United States, who testified before the Senate. We also have testimony from undercover officers who tried to infiltrate the Venceremos Brigade, and they tell us what they faced. One of the things that we hear in this testimony is that, one, the intelligence officers of the Cuban regime were very careful in picking their leaders and the members of this because they saw them as assets to collect data, spy, espionage, and also for long-term influence. This is why they picked these people. And in fact, one of the undercover agents who tried to infiltrate the Venceremos Brigade in the 70s, he said, and I quote, "To be a member of the brigade, you had to be a confirmed Marxist-Leninist." And he said that essentially, even just being a member, you had to fill out a detailed application, you had to undergo interviews concerning your political beliefs, and you had to attend 3.5 months of twice-a-week indoctrination seminars. So, I mean, you had to be a dedicated person to be a member of the Venceremos Brigade, and to be a leader of the brigade, which Karen Bass was listed as in the Communist Daily newspaper. She was identified as the leader of the brigade. This was from 1975, this article about her. And she was also surveilled by the Los Angeles Police Department. They had an undercover division, and they were surveilling Karen Bass at that time because they saw her as a leader of the brigade, and said in one of their intelligence reports that she came back with propaganda information. So she was a dedicated Marxist-Leninist, according to the documentation at the time. And that doesn't even get into all the other stuff, Kyle, because there was another clandestine Maoist organization that she was associated with as well. I mean, I could go, there's a whole lot there to delve into, my friend.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot there, and I think there's a whole lot more that has not yet been uncovered. But what's so shocking to me is that there was a Politico story on Friday morning that said hundreds, I think it was 300 DNC members are calling on Karen Bass to be named the vice presidential nominee because she is a unifying candidate. She's a unifying prospect. And so for people to say, well, you're talking sort of fringe conspiracy theories and all of that sort of thing. Well, what I talked about in the last segment was that I think there is a strong case to be made that if Karen Bass is the vice presidential candidate or potentially vice president, she's a Cuban asset. I mean, that you look at what you found and what Tablet Magazine found and historical documents from Venceremos Brigade, et cetera. I mean, she was a leader with a direct link to Cuba. What do you think that would mean for America if there was an individual like that as serving as vice president.
Well, Cuba got what they want. You're absolutely correct. I mean, part of the whole Venceremos Brigade's objective was long-term, planting the seeds for long-term political influence, hoping that these young people, these young radicals that they trained essentially, or that they indoctrinated, would eventually move into a position where they could be of help to the communist regime. And by help, I mean normalizing relations with Castro's Cuba. That's what Castro always wanted. Normalizing relations would help them alleviate all the pressures that are on them to remove that communist regime. And that's exactly what Karen Bass has been pushing for ages. And she finally got it. They finally got it. And that meant essentially that we were going to overlook all the horrors of that regime. So yeah, it's a terrible thing. And God only knows what else, putting a dedicated Marxist-Leninist in a position that's one heartbeat away from the Oval Office will mean for us. Because whoever Joe Biden is going to pick as his vice president is going to be very important, because that person could potentially become president. Let's just be honest. So yeah, it is definitely concerning, because I don't see that Karen Bass has really moved away from the positions that animated her when she was, a community organizer and activist in her youth. In fact, I see her trying to deflect from them. So I find this incredibly disturbing.
Rebecca Mansour, senior editor-at-large at Breitbart News. Really great piece. I look forward to continuing to talk with you about this if Karen Bass is the nominee, which I think the prospects of that are growing. But thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Kyle.
Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Andrew Pollack lost his daughter in the Parkland, Florida school shooting in 2018, and while many have used that as a chance to grab guns, Andrew has sought ways to enhance school security while respecting our freedoms. He's now launching School Safety Grant, an organization that awards security technology solutions to school districts, houses of worship, and police departments across America with the objective of reducing response times and saving lives in an emergency. The grants provide security software and implementation valued at up to $40,000 per location. So, Andrew, thanks for joining me, and tell me a little bit more about School Safety Grant.
We just launched this a couple of months ago, this software.
Mm-hmm.
Now, more than ever, I thought that I didn't want to wait anymore because the police are getting persecuted across the country. Defund the police, cut their budgets, take them out of schools. So for me, I said, now's the time we need to support law enforcement and give them these tools to make them more efficient. One chief I met with, when we gave him this software and we ran drills with it in schools and 911 situations, he told me, Andy, this is unbelievable. It took his department, this is his exact quote, from being in a rowboat to being. That's what he said. It just speeds up. It takes minutes off. People don't realize. Say your first responders are in a building and there's shots going off. It's very hard. It echoes inside a building. It's very hard to determine where those shots are coming when you're in the building. Now, with our system, the dispatcher could get on and tell which hallway to go down, which staircase to go down. If you go down a wrong hallway in an active shooter, you lose 2 minutes on the response time going down the wrong hallway. We take that out of it, and we all know seconds save lives. We've done tests, and we're shaving minutes off response time for law enforcement. And for me, that's everything. And when we do put this software in a police department, and I hear these guys that have been in law enforcement 30 years thanking me, telling me this is cool, it means a lot to me that I'm involved with something that's actually making a difference.
Right. Well, I mean, it just seems to me like it could make a huge difference. And again, you're not getting into the debate about, guns and bump stocks and, all of those things that are highly charged, and they don't really go anywhere because it's politicians getting involved and for a soundbite, et cetera, and they don't really fix the problem. And so it seems to me like this is a sensible thing. Is school safety grant, is that donation driven? And how can people support that?
Well, sure. Well, we raised $20 million from a private equity group. So what I do is I give it to police departments, sheriff's departments, no charge. There's zero charge ever. Current fee. We have an IT team that's constantly maintaining it. So, but I need to raise money. So because this $20 million is going to run out, and we're going to need it for other law enforcements. So also for schools, there's no startup fee or hospitals when I say schools out there, and if your child's in a private school, a charter school, have them apply. You know what I mean? It's not just public schools. For me, it's a lot easier when I'm dealing on a private level with a private school or a charter school. A lot easier to deal with than the public school system. There's less bureaucracy. But there has to be, I charge a small fee to schools per campus. And it could be like even if you have a huge campus, it's something like around $100 per month. That's it for all that software that I told you. And you know what I didn't mention either? With my software, we have an app, okay? So say, and we could make it a perimeter of the school. It only works when you're inside the school or a place of worship. You'll have an app pop up on your phone. And if something happens, you could just press that app wherever you are, and it'll go right to that responding police department. And that's all included with this software. So we charge a minimal fee just to maintain it every month, which is going to allow me to give it to more law enforcement throughout the country when I run out my original funds. So that's how they help. And you know what? Even if I owned a restaurant, a big restaurant or a hotel, I'd want to know that I had this app, and if I dialed 911, within 5 seconds, the police see my parking lot, the lobby, anywhere around a hotel or even a restaurant. Churches are soft targets. So right now, we just did a few temples in Florida where they're linked up. They got access to the door locking mechanisms. They see the cameras. It's really it's just futuristic 911 software. That's the way I look at it. It's the future of 911.
What grade would you give schools in terms of security today?
Well, it depends to every school's different, Some schools that I deal with they're preventive. They're doing everything they can when you deal with some, and others are laxed. Broward, where my daughter was murdered, right? Mm-hmm. They still have the same policies in place that led up to my daughter getting murdered, and they have a system that's inadequate compared to what we have, and they paid millions for it, and it's nothing like what I just described to you what we could do. And I'm sure there's lots of public schools out there with bureaucracy that don't see the urgency of putting their children's safety first. Like even where you live, they're talking about removing police from schools, which is idiotic to me. When I look, we've looked into all the failures and what deters shooting police, and having police in school. You trust the police. They're there to mentor kids. They want to help. When you look at different private sector doing my software, I enjoy it a lot more than dealing with bureaucrats. So I don't know. It depends, but there is public schools in New Jersey. I'm dealing with a public school system. They're so proactive. I donated even a dog to this in New Jersey, a public school, where it is an active shooter dog. It will go towards gunfire and apprehend someone if they're shooting a weapon. That's how proactive these people are in Jersey. Right now they're getting my software, and that's a public school in Jersey. Very democratic state, but they're putting the safety of their kids first. Right. And I'm here to help everyone. For me, it matters if first responders give them the tools to efficiently and shave minutes off of their response time. and kids, the safety of children and the teachers. So that's what I'm here to do. But it depends, it really depends on the school district. And that's why I tell parents that are listening, you got to get involved. You know what I mean? I didn't know what was going on at my daughter's school. I figured I live in a really upper middle class neighborhood. I was fortunate enough to live there. And I thought that the school everything they could. But when it came down to it, and I looked at it, there was no plans in place. They had kids there that emotionally disturbed, mentally ill kids going to school with my daughter. They label them special needs, and they're emotionally disturbed and violent. And they're in public schools throughout the country, and I didn't know these things. So with now, and when parents ask me, I say, you have to get involved. I would never send my daughter to a public school that was run like where my daughter went now. If I had to sell a kidney, I'd put my kid in private school, my child, or look at a charter school, or go to a public school that doesn't have those type of policies and puts the safety of your kids first.
Mm-hmm. If there's an administrator or a school board member or a pastor, someone listening who wants to learn more about this, how can they connect with you?
The greatest would be I'd love for them to go on my website, schoolsafetygrant.org. Go out. I have a simple grant application. We're doing demos over Zoom demos of the software. Just fill out my grant. It's easy. It'll be the best thing you ever did for your congregation, children at your schools, for hospitals. Right now we're going in a huge hospital system in Broward. A lot of things happen at hospitals. My wife's an ER doctor. That's why I pushed to get this into some hospitals. If you're a CEO of a hospital, get on there, look at this, and just see how it could make your employees safer and connect to law enforcement. Very simple. We could do it. So just go on schoolsafetygrant.org. I'd be happy to help anyone that fills out on my website.
That's schoolsafetygrant.org. Andrew Pollack, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. The Trafalgar Group, a political polling company based in Atlanta, was pretty much the only one in 2016 that predicted Donald Trump would win Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the Electoral College. Robert Cahaley, founder of the Trafalgar Group, joins me now. So there is a flurry of polls, and it's hard to know what to believe and what to trust. So what's the latest on what's going on in the presidential race in Michigan?
Well, what I can tell you is the what's called the mainstream polls, for whatever that term is worth, are fundamentally flawed, and they're off. I will tell you, of the things that are out there right now on the Real Clear Politics, of all the groups out there doing anything other than us, I would pay more attention to what's coming out of CNBC Change Research and more attention out of Rasmussen. And the latest CNBC Change Research has it at 4. Peter's only up by 4, which I believe is the lowest margin, the closest margin on the Real Clear Politics. And we think they're still a little bit off. They still tend to move a little bit toward D, but they are certainly more accurate than what we think most of the other groups are. There's some fundamental mistakes being made. And I can just go through what I call the three big mistakes. And we refer to most of these big, firms that work with the media companies as Pony Express pollsters. They're just doing things the old way, and it doesn't work anymore. First and foremost, relying on live callers. That's the quote unquote industry standard. Like we have to have live callers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you look at a thing called the social desirability bias, that is the point when a person gives an answer to a poll that they think will have them judged in a favorable light by the person asking the question. But that phenomenon is real, and it happens a lot, and it is very much in play in this election, and it was in 2016. It was in certain states in 2018. So when that effect is worst is when you have live callers. The more anonymous a person believes the poll to be, the more honest they give the answer. The other fundamental flaw is these long questionnaires. I don't know about you, but every person I ask this, no one can ever come up with anyone. But can you think of one person you know that if their cell phone rings at 6:30 in the evening and somebody says, I want you to participate in a poll, and they say, well, how long is this going to be? And they say,
Right.
well, it's going to be 35 questions, about 15 minutes. Do you know anybody who would stop what they're doing and answer that poll?
No.
People have real lives. They're not sitting around waiting on the quote unquote dinner hour and mother to ring a bell and then I'll come sit down for a big family feast.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the way it works anymore. People's lives are busy. So we don't believe in these long questionnaires. The third thing they're doing wrong is how they are getting their samples. They are calling universes of, sometimes they're just calling registered voters, sometimes they're just calling phone numbers and trying to figure out whether they are registered voters. They're not calling likely voters. And we think it's important to look through the voter file and to look through and to enhance your voter file with consumer data, which we do, and make an educated guess on who is going to participate in the election. And we like to use hard, crazy numbers like census data and analysis of previous elections, where some of these groups are using exit poll data. Well, exit polls are fundamentally flawed because there is no exit poll in America that had someone at every precinct, every hour it was open, and was also measuring the exit polls of people who mailed in their ballots via absentee. So it's fundamentally flawed data. You shouldn't be basing your polls on it. So those three things we think create a problem. Now, the worst part about the hidden vote, which is a reflection of the social desirability bias, and that's when somebody doesn't tell you what they really think, is that we've seen a disproportionate amount of Republicans unwilling to participate in polls. So you have to really work hard to get a Republican to answer. People who are on the Democrat side tend to be 5 to 1 more likely to participate in a poll. So it takes a lot more work to get an actual Republican sample. Now, of the Republicans who are easily willing to participate, you're going to see two things. Republicans that are disenchanted, maybe kind of Romney-type Republicans who can't wait to tell you they're not for Trump. Republicans that are hiding their vote who will just tell you they're for someone other than the fact they're for Trump. So, and add to that, they're being undersampled. So if your goal was to get 38% Republican participation in a poll, let's say it was a particular state, you needed 42 Democrat percent, 38 Republican, the rest, unaffiliated. Well, you end up, with 24% Republican because you just can't get enough to participate. And then what they do is called weighting. So then they give that 24% the weight in the poll and make them 38. Well, now you've taken a disproportionately represented 24 of those who will readily participate in the poll and weighted them up to 38. So you have expanded your error. And this is a very common thing, but they have no incentive to fix it. One of the first things you have to realize is polling is not a meritocracy. The fact that so many of these companies were in business at the end of 2016 is proof of that. If you're working for a party or a campaign or for a media outlet, they care more about, are you reinforcing their narrative of the election than did you get it right? And so you have to look at the incentive of the people doing the poll. What is their real goal?
So when you see a poll from CNN, for example, and it shows that Joe Biden is winning by 13 points in Michigan, and Michiganders are looking at each other, and I live in a swing county. It tends Democrat, but Donald Trump just about won it, Muskegon County. Donald Trump just about won it in 2016, and we look at each other and go, he's not winning. Joe Biden is not winning by 13 points. And it seems like the energy, and I want to get to this too, it seems like the energy is on the Trump side. How do you factor, and what do you find in your polls in terms of an enthusiasm gap? Is that real, and how do you factor that in?
Yes, there's an enthusiasm gap, but it's not what people think it is. Because just as the enthusiasm for Trump is high, the anti-enthusiasm for people who want Trump to lose. You don't have to be necessarily enthusiastic about Biden if you're just enthusiastic about defeating Trump. So I wouldn't put as much in the enthusiasm gap as some do. But what I would say is what affects the enthusiasm even more, and this is why I don't really understand why they're doing this, is Trump voters what we hear all the time is they're frustrated. They do not like what is going on in the world around them, especially in the last few months.
Mm-hmm.
They're very upset about all this violence, defunding police, and cancel culture, and statues being torn down. They're tired of all that. But they're also afraid to say anything for fear of being judged. So they cannot wait. That voting booth is where they're going to vent this frustration that's building up.
Mm-hmm.
And they are going to vote regardless of whether the polls say Trump is going to lose by 100 points. On the other hand, if your enthusiasm is to beat Trump and not for Biden, and you see Trump losing based on all the polls, and you aren't really excited about Biden, what are the odds you're going to vote? They are. I mean, people say, well, you guys must be in the tank for Trump. I'm like, no, we don't get paid by the campaign or the RNC. But I mean, the way I look at it, I'm Paul Revere for the Biden campaign and for the Democrat Party. You need to take this race seriously. Don't believe these polls. You're in a fight for your life. I'm warning you. So you say what you want, but they are in a real fight. They don't understand it because these votes are being hidden. People are being undersampled, and people don't want to reveal their feelings.
So is the anti-Trump sentiment or energy, does that translate into support for Biden, or is that sort of fracturing and going elsewhere?
Most of it translates to support for Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Because the anti-Trump energy is so much that they want to see him lose. It's not they want to vote against him. They want to see him lose. They understand that they must vote against him for him to lose and vote for someone to make him lose. But again, if all you want to do, if you're some street activist and you're some kid and your parents been paying you to go to this expensive school and now you're rolling around protests and everything else and trying to act cool and doing all this stuff and out there, and you can't wait to see Trump defeated, and everything tells you on election day, hey, Trump is losing by 15 points. Do you go to the trouble to go get an absentee ballot from your hometown?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. So it really is working against their purposes. So the media narrative is trying to be that Trump is losing, and I realize it is helping people raise money up and down the Democrat ticket.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question the money we're seeing pouring into these U.S. Senate races on the Democrat side is a direct result from the media narrative that is, disseminated that Trump is in trouble, so that they think these races are more in play.
Interesting. Well, Robert Cahaly, founder of the Trafalgar Group, I hope that we can talk again before the election. And as I said before, we started talking. Anytime you come to Michigan, I'd love to host you and talk more about what's going on because it's so interesting. So thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here. And, we always love the state that gave us John Smoltz.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining me today. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter, Kyle Olson 4. Use the same handle for Parler, Kyle Olson 4, KYLEOLSON 4. This is the Kyle Olson Show.